has ever heard and ever will hear. The story or the message I have for you today is entitled A Man Named Cyrus. And I suspect that even though Cyrus is named 22 times in the Bible, very few of you know much about this man. And I think that's not unreasonable because he's not a Christian. He's not a religious man. In fact, you'll see probably more about Cyrus in the history books of secular history than you will about in Christian history. But the amazing thing about Cyrus is that he was used by God. And I got to ask you a question. Imagine someone coming up before you you've never met. He addresses you by name. He seems to know you. And he proceeds to tell you that his Bible has a prophecy about you that was written some 140 years before you were even born. Would that blow your mind? I know it would me. And it did Cyrus. Daniel came to Cyrus and says, guess what, Cyrus? God knew you were going to take over Babylon. He knew you were going to conquer. And here's what he said you were going to do. And I think that's pretty cool stuff. And too many times when you get the secular people who want to argue about the Bible, they say, well, they got that written after the fact. They already knew the facts, so then they filled in the prophecy before. But when we're talking 140 years, that's a little tough to do. But let me give you some background information so that you understand where this is happening and what's going on. Israel has gone from being a godly country to a sinful country. And they've waffled back and forth with good and bad kings. And to be honest with you, they just really haven't been doing well. And according to God's prophecy, God says you are going to go into exile, into Babylon, for 70 years. And this was prophesied in Jeremiah 836 BC. Which was long before Cyrus's time. You know, I think, especially in today's world, we all want to know what's going to happen. If you watch the news and all the folks that analyze the news, everybody's trying to tell you what they think will happen next. And some of that is not all that happy. Some of it's a little scary. And it kind of reminds me of a man who opened a fortune cookie one time to get his fortune. And he found this in his fortune cookie. You are a poor, pathetic, gullible fool who seeks advice from bakery products. I think too often we want to hear, we want to get a sense of what's going on, and we look at all the wrong people for that direction. Daniel, on the other hand, followed God's word. And I will tell you that, frankly, that book, which is thousands of years old, has more accuracy in determining what's going to happen today than anything I've seen on the news lately. So it's worth looking at that Bible. And as I look at Cyrus, who was not a godly man, he never claimed to believe in God. He was a tyrant. He overthrew Babylon in a very vicious way. But Cyrus was used by God. And I think that's an irony that we need to look at and understand, because I think it will give us comfort in this day and age. I'll be honest, as I look around the world today, I see very few godly leaders. And in fact, the ones who do claim to be godly generally do it only for voting purposes. The fact of the matter is, within our own nation and the nations of this world, I can probably on one or two hands count the number of truly godly leaders in this world. They claim to believe in God, but they do not follow his direction. They claim to believe but they don't practice that belief. And to some degree, that causes me a little bit of consternation. Because when I know that leaders are out there that are not following God, I can assume that what's going to be taking place in their leadership is not going to be godly. But when I read the story of Cyrus, I reclaim some hope that even though they may not be godly, God is still on his throne and he is still at work. Our first scripture is in 2 Chronicles 36, 22 through 23. And it says, "Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, the king of Persia, so that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom and put it into writing. Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all kingdoms of this earth. And he has charged me to build him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Whoever is among you and of his people, may the Lord his God be with him. Let him go up." Now, like I said, Cyrus is an arrogant leader. He's the king of Persia. He has conquered the most mighty country, a nation in the world at that time, which was Babylon. He is the new big man in the world. And I will suggest to you that like almost every leader I've ever met, he was an arrogant, self-egotistical man. But when Daniel told him that the Bible prophesied specifically about him and named him by name, perhaps because of that ego, Cyrus was willing to listen and willing to follow the directions. And that's because God knew what it would take to motivate Cyrus to do what he did. And Cyrus allowed the people to return to Israel as God directed. And I don't know, I really don't think that Cyrus would have done that if Daniel hadn't pointed out the prophecies. And like I said, being an egotistical leader, I have no doubt to hear that you've been written about 140 years before you were born has to do a big thing for your ego. And I believe that Cyrus's ego, by the motivation of God, led him to do the right thing. And we get down to Isaiah 45, 1 through 7. And we see it from God's perspective. "Thus saith the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have grasped to subdue the nations before him, to loose the belts of kings, to open doors before him, that gates may not be closed. I will go before you, and I will level the exalted places. I will break into pieces the doors of bronze, and cut through the bars of iron. I will give you the treasures of darkness and the hoards in secret places, that you may know that it is I, the Lord God of Israel, who calls you by name. For the sake of my servant Jacob and the Israel my chosen, I call you by name. I name you, though you did not know me. I am the Lord, and there is no other. Besides me, there is no God. I equip you, though you did not know me, that people may know from the rising of the sun to the west, from the rising of the sun and from the west, that there is none besides me. I am the Lord, and there is no other. I form light and create darkness. I make well-being and create calamity. I am the Lord that does all these things." Isaiah is clearly pointing out that God has control. And I want to tell you, that is sometimes quite good. And the fact that he can still influence even non-godly people should give me some sort of comfort. But one of the problems with that is when I see governments and leaders doing bad things, part of me wants to say, well, gee, maybe God lost control there. And I think it's important to understand that God does establish leaders. Romans 13:1 says, "Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and they exist having been instituted by God. All authority is instituted and placed there by God. Now that is okay when I've got good leaders. And you would think that if they're all being led by God, they'll all be good leaders. But you're all old enough to know that doesn't work. In fact, there have been too many leaders, like Hitler, like Pharaoh, who rejected God's will, and that led to very bad things happening. The thing about the problem with leaders is they have the ability to listen and do what God calls them to do, like Cyrus does, or they reject what God calls them to do, and they end up becoming the problems that we see. It is interesting because Pharaoh is a perfect example of a man who was placed there by God, but who rejected every part of God. In Exodus 9:16, God speaks about Pharaoh, and it says, "For this purpose I have raised you up, to show you my power, so that my name may be proclaimed through the earth." God put Pharaoh in his position to show his power. Now, if you know the story of the Israelites, they suffered greatly under Pharaoh. In fact, Pharaoh pursued them into the desert, wanting to kill them all. Pharaoh was an evil leader, and yet God put him there. And part of me wants to go, hey, wait a minute, Lord, couldn't you have picked a less obnoxious man? And, you know, from a human perspective, that's what my desire would be. Find somebody that doesn't do it as badly as Pharaoh. Another perfect example of that is Hitler. Some of you are old enough to remember World War II and Hitler. And for those who, like me, are history buffs, you realize just how truly evil that man was. And I see people like Pharaoh and Hitler and some of the leaders today that are destroying it. And I see them practicing evil. And I start to question Romans 13. Does God still have control? And if he does, why would he allow such crazy, terrible things? The genocide that the Holocaust exhibited was unspeakable. It was a terrible thing. 6 million people died at the hand of a maniac. How could that have been within God's will? Let me be very frank. It was not God's will. It was the rebellion of individuals like Hitler and his followers that led them to do evil, terrible things. And make no mistake, they were still following a leader. It just wasn't God. It was Satan. And the thing about it is, we sometimes have to experience that evil and be so shocked by it. For example, the Holocaust. To cause us to say, as they did in World War II, never again. Now, I'm sadly going to tell you that I've met many a Holocaust survivor, but I've also met young people who have not. And one of the things that's going around today is that this denial that the Holocaust ever existed, or that it was certainly not as bad as it was told to be. The evil that we saw has to be seen by man to reject it. And it is one of those things that we must understand, that it is God who does allow even evil sometimes to take part. Because sometimes man has to see evil for what it truly is. And nothing but the Holocaust could have grasped the attention of the world and shown true evil as a man who decided to kill all the people he disliked by putting them in gas chambers. We must not let that memory die. But we also must realize that that man who started that was placed in that position by God, perhaps just to horrify us so much that we would not allow another leader like him to take place. And there's a sad truth about history, which is if you forget history, you're bound to repeat it. And I will suggest to you that in 2022, the lessons we learned from the Holocaust have long gone out of the minds of many, and that we are primed to go into just that type of environment again. We need to trust that God will put people into that area, but we also need to be, as human beings, responsible to see evil for what it is. But I'm getting a little bit off touch because we're here to talk about Cyrus. And Cyrus was a godless leader who was used by God to do God's will. And I will tell you, as strange as that sounds, I have experienced it in my own life. It's amazing to me in talking with non-Christians how every so often a non-Christian who knows nothing about the Bible will, in a conversation, speak a biblical principle that they don't even recognize, but I do, and speak truth into my life. And I know they didn't get that from when they were growing up in Sunday school, because I'm here to tell you, I have met 50 and 60-year-old people who've never been in Sunday school, never been in church. If you talk about David and Goliath, they will go, who? They may have heard of Adam and Eve, but they don't know the story. There are people who have never been to church, like most of you who have been in the church all your life, and they know nothing about God. And yet I have met these people and I've heard them speak biblical principles because God used them to say, Rick, you need to hear something. And I love that. Because God is able to use even the unsaved. God is able to use even people like Adolf Hitler, because his will is going to be done. Psalm 47 verses 8 through 9 says, God reigns over the nation. God sits on his holy throne. The princes of the people gather as the people of God of Abraham. For the shields of the earth belong to God. He is highly exalted. All authority in this world belong to God. God establishes those leaders. And sometimes in their rebellion against God, they will do truly despicable, evil things. But if they're willing to hear the voice of God, even though they don't understand it, God can and does use them. To be real honest with you, one of the verses that as a young man I struggled with immensely was Romans 8:28. And it says, and we know that for all those who love God, all things work together for the good of those who are called according to his purpose. Do you believe that everything in your life has worked to the good of your? If you're like me, there have been moments in your life where you go, I don't think so. Don't try and explain to me how this terrible, horrible thing is going to work out to my benefit. When you look at the Holocaust and you go, Lord, the killing of 6 million Jews and other people, what possible good could come from that? And yet it was the very Holocaust that instituted a fulfillment in the Old Testament of Israel being remade. In May, I think 18th, 1948, the nation of Israel was reestablished in one day. And the Old Testament said, a nation shall be born of one day. Who has ever heard of such a thing? Never before and never since has a nation been established in one day, but the nation of Israel in 1948 was established as a direct result of a Holocaust. I cannot look at the punishment and the terrible crimes committed of the Holocaust and see good. But I can see where the world would never have accepted the nation of Israel. Let's face it, in 2022, there are still many, many nations that do not accept the nation of Israel. There have been too many wars fought since then to drive them into the sea, to destroy them completely. The fact that Israel remains as a nation today is a direct result of the Holocaust. And it could not and would not have happened regardless. It confirms what Romans 8:28 says. Does that diminish the suffering? Absolutely not. Does it mean that God willed that suffering? Absolutely not. But what it does say is that God is God. He is the God of all people. And His will be done, whether people want it or not. So as I read about Cyrus, a non-Christian who does not believe or follow God, and the fact that he was used so greatly by God to do His will because he was willing to listen. And even people like Hitler and Pharaoh, who would not listen to God, who rejected it, who followed Satan instead, and they practiced their evil ways, even they brought about God's will. Pharaoh's rejection of following God brought great plagues and destruction on the people of Egypt. And in fact, his ego caused him to drown in the sea with his army. Hitler died at the hand of his own hand, destroyed after he tried to destroy the world. What does that mean for you and me in 2022? I think it's a good question. In fact, it's a great question. Because we are now in times where our leaders are doing questionable things. We're seeing a war in Europe led by a man who certainly is not following God. Unfortunately, fighting a nation that also equally is not following God. There is corruption abroad and at home. There are too many people in leadership position doing too much evil. And that can be discouraging. For you and me as a Christian, what it means is we should be aware of what our leaders are doing. There's an election coming up in just about, 2.5 weeks? And I tell you, you better get out and vote. And that is including you folks that will vote against me and what I vote for. We, the people, have a responsibility to hold our leaders accountable. And it is that complete corporate accountability that does cause our leaders to do what they should do, even if they don't want to. But I'm here to tell you that even if the leaders that I choose do not get elected, and the leaders that I fear do get elected, God is still on His throne. God will cause His direction to be taught to all the leaders, and He will establish that government. He will tell them what to do. And if they, like Cyrus, follow His will, there will be good things to happen. If they, on the other hand, reject God's will and they want to fight God, then we could face some very evil and hard times. And unfortunately, I can tell you that in many, many cases, what I see is that those leaders are, in fact, still in play, and they are still happening. Biden has asked that Putin be removed. Unfortunately, we don't have the authority to do that. Would it be good that Putin was removed? I would suggest so. But you got to be careful, because sometimes when you get one bad apple out, you can replace them with several bad apples. We cannot, as human beings, see the repercussions of what we did and what we do. But if we trust God, and if we follow God, we can trust that God will take all the circumstances of our world, the good and the evil, and as Christians, He will work them to our good. Make no mistake, as long as you live in this world, you will find evil leaders. There are people placed in position who will reject God, who will follow Satan, and will do truly evil things, both here and abroad. That is going to be part of your existence in this world. Now that's depressing. And if I left you there, I think it would be too depressing. The good news is that even when those evil people do what they do, my God sits upon His throne, and He will take what they intend for evil, and He will make something good out of that. I may not easily see it. I may not go through the situation without pain. My own personal experience with my own father is a perfect example. When I read Romans 8:28 as a teenager, I scoffed. How could that possibly be of any good? How could doing what He did to us be of any value? At age 66, I can tell you of the times where I have shared with people in similar circumstances and have been able to share the love of God with them because we share that mutual suffering. The Holocaust provided us the nation of Israel. And the truth of the matter is, my friends, the nation of Israel will stand until this world falls eventually by God's hands. When I tell you that I don't do that from my authority or my knowledge, it's because what the Bible tells me is Israel is there at the end of times. And in fact, the world goes against Israel to destroy them one more time. And rather than Israel fighting that battle, God fights that battle. And it's a battle called Armageddon. It's a bad battle. It gets ugly. And it gets very evil. Because it is truly the battle of good and evil for the last time, where God does finally say enough and put Satan in hell where he belongs. As you face the world today, know that God has put those people into their positions. When the election happens, no matter how it turns out, know God has a plan for those people. Also know that they may or may not follow God's plan. If, like Cyrus, they do, my friends, we will see godly things happen. If, like Hitler and Pharaoh, they do not, then, my friends, we will see bad things and evil prevail. But even in that, we do not lose hope, because never forget, God is on his throne. No human being will supersede God's authority, and they will never be able to go past where God allows them in evil. And no matter how much evil they do, God will create something good out of that. I love that we opened up with that song, In the Garden, because I imagine that that might have been a song that Adam and Eve sung in remembrance of the times when they walked in the garden with God. My friends, they lived in a world that was fallen from the rest of their lives, with the memory of what it looked like to be with God. You and I are in the exact opposite. We live in a fallen world that we were born into, and we look forward to the day when we can walk in the garden with God, when we will be in heaven and be restored. But until that time, we will, in fact, be in a hard world We will face hard times. Never forget, God is on his throne. And if he can use a man like Cyrus, he can use anybody. Thank you.